I'm your host, Christopher Morgan for Cybercrime Radio. Joining me today is Anola Johnson, romance scam rebellion podcast host and fraud prevention specialist. Anola combines deep research with her own lived experience of surviving a romance scam to provide fraud education, awareness, romance scam psychology insights, and perform policy advocacy. She has consulted and testified before governmental legislative bodies on scam-related matters. Anola, thank you for joining us today. To start off, I'd like to jump back to early 2023 when you received a message on LinkedIn from a scammer posing as an oil rigger named Pedro. This fraudster would go on to defraud you of $850,000. Can you tell us what happened and how this romance scam led you to devote your work to prevention?
Yeah, thanks. As I have learned, these people really have a script, and what happened to me just went right down the script lines. But I was just getting back from a work trip in Paris, and my life was going pretty good at that point. I had just gotten a new job in December of 2022. We took this trip in March of 2023, and a couple of days coming back, I had this attractive man reach out to me on LinkedIn, which I had no idea that there were scammers on LinkedIn. I thought it was a professional site. I didn't see any problem with it. So I connected and immediately he wanted to chat. Oh, one other thing that I should tell you is that at that point in time, this new job was going to be my last, right? And I had about 2 years left to pay off my mortgage, and I would have been completely out of debt. So, along comes this guy, and he wants to talk, and, he was nice looking, so I thought, "Okay, great. We can all use more friends," right? And he was very cordial, very benign at the first. It was like, "Is it okay if we talk? Are you married?" And it went on to his backstory, which was he was born in Spain. His both his parents had been killed in a car crash, and so he was raised by his Aunt Judy. Then he had he had gone to school in Denmark and Germany and was some sort of supervising engineer freelancer on oil rigs. But he lived in San Diego. He had lost his wife about 5 years prior, and he had one son that went to school in Texas. Um, so I mean that all sounded reasonable, and I told him that, I hadn't been in a relationship for a really long time. I was raised my children as a single mom. They're adults now, of course, and um but anyway, it just went on to, talking about daily life and what do you like to do, just the getting to know you questions. And within a couple of weeks, it had spun to the point of, we were communicating multiple times daily, every day. So within a couple of weeks, he was telling me that he loved me. And when he said that, I was kind of taken aback, but I thought that I was infatuated with this guy. And I thought, well, I don't really think that I'm in love yet because I haven't even met this person. So, um, but I told him that I loved him too, thinking that maybe eventually, probably it would happen at some point in time. So after that, things progressed quite quickly, and we were going to meet at the end of April. I was going to go down to San Diego and meet him. But in the meantime, he had been applying for these positions with different oil companies. And probably 2, 3 days before we were to meet, he came to me and said that he had gotten a job with the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company over in the Middle East. And so I was very disappointed. Um, but he said he would only be gone like a month or 6 weeks. And so I thought, okay, well, I can handle that. And we kept talking. after he left. He had to leave immediately. And so after he got over there, he brought up the idea that because we were going to be together soon, that we should start um a crypto account together, an investment. So I was uncomfortable that with that, but I also wanted to please him. And I said, "Well, how much are you thinking?" And I was thinking, maybe 1,000 or 2,000, and he came out with 50,000. And I thought, "Oh my gosh, I would have to cash in my IRA in order to get money like that." And so after talking about it for a while, I decided to do that. I cashed out one of my IRAs and I put 50,000 into a crypto company that he provided. He said that his friend had put in money and was doing really well, making a lot of money on it. And I hadn't been making that much money on my IRA. So I thought, well, hopefully this will be better than what I've been experiencing.
Can I ask when in the storyline, so you guys began speaking in March. When was it that he asked you to invest in the crypto? And then how far along did you then put money into crypto?
It was probably around May.
Okay.
So in the meantime, he was just grooming me that whole time, right? And doing what we call love bombing. It was like over the top affection. He would send me these lovely morning and evening messages, something that women don't hear a lot. And so to hear these things, it's like, oh, this guy really likes me. And I don't know why, but he does. And so I was just going with it. But yeah, so it was probably around May that we started with the investment. And so I put 50,000 in and he was going to put 50,000 in at the same time. So he would screenshot me and show me that he was putting his 50,000 in, I would put mine in, and then he had me in charge of the password and the account. He says, "I'm too busy to look at it all the time, so I'm gonna have you keep an eye on it for us and just tell me what's going on with it." Which, gave me pseudo control over the account. So and it was weird because I was seeing that it would make like $2,000 a day, which normally would really raise a red flag, but I didn't know anything about crypto, and I'd always heard that, people were overnight millionaires. So I I was just trusting him, and I really didn't know what I was doing. So, we had that one. Then a week or so later, he comes and asks me to go with another crypto company, a separate one, and wanted me to put another 50,000 in that one, which I did, and he supposedly put 70,000 in that one. So, we were just going along for a while, and then he calls me or texts me one day. It was all text, where we weren't talking that much, but he gets a hold of me and says, "Hey, my internet over here is really bad. Would you do me a favor? I really need to send some money from my bank account to my supplier over in Singapore." And so he gave me all his banking information and the passcode, and I was in his account. And when I got in there, it showed over $4 million. So he wanted me to do a wire transfer for $1.4 million to his supplier, which I did. Everything went fine. A few days later, he asked me to do another transfer to somebody else for $108,000, which I did. It all worked out fine. Then he asked me a third time for a third favor. And when we did that, he said that his internet was really slow that day. And it was so slow that I couldn't get the code fast enough from his cell phone. and got locked out of the account. Um, so I thought that I had done something wrong. He didn't seem overly upset about it, but said he would get a hold of the bank and open the account again. But then he got a hold of me later saying that the bank wanted him to come in person, and which of course he couldn't do because he was out in the ocean somewhere on this rig. So he said, in the meantime, while I'm trying to get this opened, would you mind loaning me $100,000 to send to my supplier so that I can get these materials and then I can come home sooner? And I promise I will pay you back with interest. No problem. And I had seen over $4 million in his account, right? So I thought, well, this guy is good for it. He's going to pay me back. And so I had to cash out my other IRA in order to do that, which I did and sent to his supplier. Then, that was the first ask of many. So between probably June and the end of that year, there were he that's when he was draining me of every cent that I had. Once he had all my savings, he asked if I could get loans on my HELOC for my home equity line of credit. So, because my place was just about paid off, I had a lot of equity that I could provide, and the bank said I could take out $380,000 or 80% of my the value of my home, and he would tell me to tell them, well, one is for investment, another is for materials, another is for home upgrades, which had to go to the bank like 3 times and keep upping my investment amount because I didn't do it all at once. I didn't think that I would need that much money, but, I kept having to go back and would tell them whatever story I thought would not create doubt in their minds. Um, Even though they did start doubting me and started questioning me more, but I really thought that this guy was gonna make good on it. But by the end of well, by the 1st of December, he again said that he had been delayed, he wasn't coming home. There'd been a big accident on the rig and yada yada. But his son was so upset with him because he hadn't been home all this time. And so I thought, well, should I send him a Christmas present? Which I did, and it turned out that he wanted a top of the line iPad with all the bells and whistles. Oh, and while you're at it, do you mind throwing in the newest iPhone? Which I did, which took me to the very end of my credit. And I sent the package to Houston, and then probably a week later, I get this phone call from a voice that I had never heard before, and this man says, "Is this Anola Johnson?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "You sent a package to Houston. I just wanna know, was that package meant to go on to Nigeria?" And my heart just about stopped, and I thought, "No, it was a present for my boyfriend's son." And so he started at that point in time, I had so many questions before, even though I kept doing what I felt was there was something wrong with all of this. I kept doing it, and when this man called me, I just thought, "Okay, this is the sign that something really is wrong and I'm in trouble." And I had to stop and think about it for a little bit. But he did say, "I don't want you to just believe who I am. I want you to, when we hang up, I want you to um, look up the phone number for this department that he said he was in, the federal government, and and then I want you to call him and ask if I work there, which I did, and it was confirmed that he did work there. So, I really appreciated that because at this point, you just don't know who to believe or what to trust. Your world is just totally turned inside out. It's devastating. It took me a couple of days to wrap my head around what had gone on during this past 9 months, and I called the agent back, and I basically told him everything. And he what he wanted me to do at that point was to continue talking to Pedro like nothing had happened, nothing had changed, and in the meantime, I was funneling him all this paperwork, the bank statements, the wallet addresses, everything that I had, I was funneling to the agent, and they were checking up on it. And, so at the very end, um, I just there was a point where I could quit talking to him, and I did that. And one morning, I had, like, 3 quick phone calls, like, 6 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't answer any of them, and this was probably February of 2025 now. And then I got a text, and he's saying, "Why so silent? What's really going on?" And I thought, that's really strange," because we hadn't really been talking that much in between. And, so I called the agent back and I said, "Do you know why, um, he said this?" I said, "Would you guys have anything to do with this?" And he said, "Well, if I told you, I'd have to kill you." Not really, I'm just kidding. But but, it made me feel like they were doing something about it. And actually, the case is still going on, so I can't really say much more than that about it. Um, I just talked to him like a couple of weeks ago, and they confirmed that it's still going on. And so that's kind of how that ended. I just quit talking to him because I mean, I could have talked to him and just you know, called him everything in the book, but what good is that going to do at this point in time? He would just be laughing at me and hang up anyway, so I wasn't gonna give him the satisfaction, so I just disappeared, and that's pretty much how that happened.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that your case is still open. I know that, for a lot of victims, sadly, recouping funds or having agencies look into things, it's pretty difficult or remaining to look into it and them still being able to trace something. So I'm glad that that's still going on. So I want to circle back a little bit to how this romance scam led you to devote your work to prevention.
Well, afterwards, I was totally devastated, and I did have to tell my family about it. I had to come clean on everything, and that in itself was something I had been trying so hard not to do. Nobody wants to come out and say, what happened to them. It's just demoralizing. You blame yourself. But when I was talking with one of my sisters who I'm especially close with, she said, "You need to do a podcast. There's a story here and people need to hear it." And I thought, "Yeah, I don't think so." But as I thought about it more and more, and as I kind of regained my logical brain, I decided that maybe that is something that people need to hear, and I need to say it not only as a way of catharsis for myself, but, um it would just warn other people, and I was so angry that he had done this to me, and I knew he was out there doing it to other people, they don't care about me at all, and so that's kind of why I started writing and doing all of this, and it's just kind of, grown now, which I appreciate. I'm glad people do wanna hear it because something that's happening globally. It's not just a US problem, it's everywhere, all walks of life. And it's really a national security issue at this point. If all of our US dollars for a generation are going out of the country, is our government really okay with that? I would hope not.
I'd like to go into a guest that you recently had on your podcast. Brian Denny is a man whose photos have been used in thousands of romance scams. You recently featured him on your podcast. Let's take a listen.
And I got mostly very nice people who were just trying to sort out where they were, what was going on, why this was happening. My wife really gets the rough ones because people know, as soon as you're associated on social media together, they targeted her, and she's often in the storyline. She's an evil person, won't let me divorce her, has all the money, and so they'll come at her with threats. You can imagine how this plays on your emotion. I still travel for business. And, 2 years ago, the first day I get to Poland, my wife gets a letter from a lady in Poland saying, woman to woman, I want you to know your husband and I have been in a relationship for several months now. I want you to divorce him. I've talked to your son. He wants his dad to be happy. It was my first wife who dealt with this from the get go. And, I was married for 26 years, my first wife, and she had a hard time understanding why this was happening and what was going on. And, with so many people coming out of the woodwork to tell her that this was happening, it becomes like, well, I don't know what's true or not. I'm like, okay. And so that becomes problematic. And
So that really affected your relationship.
yes, I mean,
Was
with
that
people
the
I work with.
demise?
Yeah. And they only really talk about my son because he's in the pictures when this started. They don't talk about the rest of my kids, who one of which shuns social media entirely. My son shuns it because he's forever trapped as a 13, 14-year-old because that's when the pictures are.
Brian's story illustrates how romance scams are dual victim crimes. Can you break down this concept and elaborate on what it's like for the secondary victim, the person who is the face of a scam?
Yeah. So I think that the people who listen to these stories, they're mainly looking for the amount of money that the victims lost. Mainly, I think so they can tell themselves that they would never fall for something like this, which is not accurate, by the way. And I started thinking about this more after I looked for and found the man whose picture was used as bait for my scam. I did send him an email to let him know that his pictures were being used to dupe victims and that I had been duped into a romance scam and thought that I was talking to him. And at that point, I did realize that he didn't know me, and he was married with 6 kids living over in Israel, and he did not want a relationship with me, and I didn't want one with him either. I just, you know, wanted some closure to my tragic little story, and I told him that this was more of a goodbye email than a hello. I was just trying to look for a way to put an end to the misery that I was going through. He did email me back and said that he was sorry for what I'd been through, but he was happily married and not looking for a relationship, and that he hoped I would find my way out of the mess I found myself in. And he also told me that when he started receiving messages from women all around the world, that he stopped all his social media activity. He just wanted to go back living his life with his family. And it was at this point I realized that he is just as much a victim as I am. He had no choice, no knowledge that people like this were out there. Unlike Brian, he had no idea what romance scams even were. So when I started my podcast, I wanted to make sure to include, these people to let listeners know that there's more than one victim in these crimes. There are there are people like me, and then there are people whose pictures are used as bait, but there's even more victims of this crime. And that includes the families of the victims. They suffer knowing their loved one is in pain, or that they're in a relationship that's not real. They can see it, but the victim cannot. And then Also, fourthly, there are victims who are trafficked in committing these crimes. So really, there's four types of victims that come out of these scams. It's not just me.
Yeah, and we hear, I think, most frequently that the victim that the scammer directly communicates with, their stories are heard most often. But why would you say that other victims' stories are overlooked?
Again, I think it's just that people are looking for the sensationalism and that they want to know how much money me or those like me lost. And I think it's almost a form of entertainment, like when you see it in the media, they'll have a 40-minute or an hour program on what happened to a person, but they don't really go into prevention or how to stay safe and how to keep your loved ones safe. So I think it's all sort of come off as entertainment, unfortunately.
Another romance scam victim you recently had on your podcast was Beth Highland. Let's hear a bit of what Beth had to share with you.
He always used my fear against me and made me think it was my fear was the problem. And then he would exacerbate the fear, and then he would make me think he was the one helping me heal it. I am not going to send more money, but I have to go back and I have to know for sure. I have to play this out. And I told my friend too. I didn't tell my family, but one of my friends knew. So like, keep me accountable. So I go back and I'm like, I think I still knew something was wrong, that he was a scammer, but I also really felt like I broke his heart. I really felt like I misjudged him.
Beth describing her fear here and decision to reinstate contact with the romance scammer reminded me of how, on average, it takes a victim leaving an abuser 7 times before they stay away for good. Why is it that romance scam victims may go back to a romance scammer after cutting ties or continue the relationship, even when they know it's likely that they're being extorted?
Boy, what a loaded question, right? What's happening is the victim has formed a genuine emotional attachment to that person that they believe is real. The feelings are real, even if the relationship is not. From a neurochemical standpoint, romance scammers are experts at triggering the same reward pathways involved in healthy romantic relationships. There's the constant communication, over the top affection, or otherwise known as the love bombing, attention we may have never received before, and these future promises that they've planted in our minds of the life we'll have together once they return. All of these will all of these will release dopamine, oxytocin, and the other feel good chemicals associated with bonding and attachment. And over time, the victim becomes emotionally dependent on those interactions. The scammer becomes a source of hope, excitement, comfort, and connection. But then there's something else that happens too, and that's that the scammer doesn't provide affection consistently. They alternate between attention and withdrawal, and from affection and crisis, then love and rejection. This is called the intermittent reinforcement. It's one of the most powerful conditioning mechanisms there are. It's the same principle that makes gambling so addictive. So, as a result, when victims try to leave, they're not simply walking away from the scam. They're experiencing something that can very much feel like loss of a real relationship. Even when the victim begins to suspect they're being deceived, another psychological force often takes hold, which is cognitive dissonance. The brain is struggling between two conflicting beliefs. I love this person, and this person may be scamming me. So, to quiet that discomfort, we'll often cling to that relationship longer than logic would suggest. We've invested so much time, emotion, and money into the relationship that walking away means confronting not only that person they believe they loved, but also the likelihood that the entire relationship was a lie and that all the money they invested, that's also gone. And that is an incredibly painful reality to face.
Both your and Beth's scams involve Bitcoin Depot. The clip I'm about to play is you speaking about a third victim whose losses were associated with a crypto ATM.
In April 2025, a scam victim in Benton County, Arkansas, lost their life savings to a fake jury duty scam. The sheriff's office seized the $14,120 from a Bitcoin Depot ATM, money they believed belonged to the victim. Bitcoin Depot sued law enforcement to get that money back. That's the business model in black and white. A scam victim loses $14,120. Bitcoin Depot takes their 25 to 35% cut, let's say around $4,000. And when law enforcement tries to return what's left to the victim, Bitcoin Depot goes to court to keep all of it.
According to Bitcoin Depot CEO Alex Holmes, last month the company filed for bankruptcy due to stringent compliance obligations from states, increasing litigation, and tougher transaction limits. Recently, Utah House Bill 72 and Senate Bill 173 went into effect, two Utah legislations you advocated for. Can you explain what led to these bills being created, how they protect consumers, and why they're having such an impact on Bitcoin Depot's business model?
Well, I got involved with AARP in December of 2025, and I learned that they were doing a big push for regulations on these machines, which I'm in total favor of. I was put in touch with the Utah chapter in January and was asked if I'd be willing to testify in the Utah legislature about the restrictions on the crypto ATMs. Prior to that legislation, there were no restrictions in this state. And nationally, there were about 31,000 of these machines operating. That's about as many McDonald's and Starbucks in this country combined. Scammers would direct their targets to these machines and have them deposit the money there. Once the money's deposited, it is gone. There's no refund policy, no one to help once the person found out that they had been scammed. So, um, my job was to just testify and let let the people here know that the business model for these Bitcoin ATMs is just to gain money to get their cut of somebody that's already being scammed. So somebody goes and puts in $20,000. Bitcoin gets what, five to $6,000 off of that. They don't care what the situation is. All they care about is that they earn some more money. And that just infuriates me. So I was so happy to be able to testify that there should be restrictions on these cryptos, but I don't think the Utah restrictions went far enough. A lot of places there would be like a maximum of $1,000 a day, but in Utah it was for the first 72 hours, I think it was 2,500 a day, and then after that you could put in $5,000 a day. Well, the Bitcoin people are still making 25 to 35% of all of those dollars, and which would probably help them keep operating. But then, what was it in April, May, and June, we had Indiana, Tennessee, and Minnesota totally ban these machines. And there were so many lawsuits and, with the legislation really breathing down their necks, I think that they had to fold because that is their business model to only earn money off of people who are being scammed.
What is the difference between scams that involve Bitcoin Depot in comparison to those who use Zelle or Venmo?
Well, Venmo and Zelle, they move money through the banking system, so it's a little bit easier to follow that money. But when somebody puts money into a Bitcoin ATM, that immediately um well, not immediately, it takes a few minutes, but it takes that victim's cash and it turns it into cryptocurrency, which you can then put into your wallet, um, and then also send it to a scammer's wallet, basically. You don't know it's a scammer, but they are. So once you put that money in, there's no refund. There's no, you know, second thoughts. It's gone. And so that's why these things are so devastating. You put the money in there, they're faster. It's harder to trace money, and it's almost impossible. I don't know that I've ever heard of anybody getting their money back.
I just want to say thank you for sharing your story and insights and joining us today. Before we conclude, do you have anything else that you would like to share?
I would just say, don't keep this to yourselves. Don't isolate. If you know that you have been a victim of these scams, you need to report it. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of, promise in doing that, but it helps us figure out the number of people in this country who are getting scammed, the amounts that are leaving the country. You can report to ic3.gov. AARP has a fraud helpline that you can get onto, and they have trained volunteers that can help you once you know that you've been scammed. But please don't keep silent about it. That is a dangerous place to be.
Thank you, Anola.
Thank you so much for having me.
For Cybercrime Radio, I'm Christopher Morgan. Joining me today was Romance Scam Rebellion host Anola Johnson. The Romance Scam Rebellion podcast can be found on Apple Podcast. For more of our media, visit our website at cybersecurityventures.com.